The marshal threw her down hard into the dirt like she was nothing. Gray hair, weathered face, standing there with more dignity than the whole town combined. Then a little boy stepped into the street and said the word that stopped everyone cold.
Mama?
He'd never seen her before. His father looked at this complete stranger and did something no one expected. He paid everything he had to bring her home. What happened in that house afterward healed a broken family in ways no one saw coming. Garrett heard it before he saw it. That particular rhythm of a horse pushed past comfort, the wheels catching wrong on the ruts. He had both children with him on the boardwalk outside the general store, June with the supply list, Eli with his fist wrapped in the hem of his coat. He looked up. The marshal was up top with his jaw set, and that expression he wore when he needed the town to see him working. The woman came off the wagon the way cargo comes off a wagon. The marshal had her by the arm, and the momentum did the rest, and she came down hard onto the packed dirt of the main street, and the sound of it carried clear across to where Garrett stood. She did not cry out. She found her footing, straightened, and stood. Just stood. The marshal was already announcing to anyone listening. Thief, stolen property, detainment, anyone interfering would answer to him personally. The town pulled itself inward and watched, the way it always watched. Nobody moved. The woman did not struggle and did not plead. She was not young, gray in her hair, weather in her face, and she held herself, even now, even with the marshal's hand on her arm in front of the whole town, like she was standing in her own kitchen. Still, present, belonging completely to herself, regardless of what was happening around her. Garrett was still reading that when Eli let go of his coat. The small weight just left his side. June's sharp intake of breath came half a second later, and he looked down, and Eli was already out in the open street 2 steps off the boardwalk, and before Garrett's hand could find him, the boy opened his mouth and said it, clear and certain, the way children say the things they mean completely. Mama. It hit the street like a stone hit still water. The marshal stopped talking. The watching people stopped shifting. Even the wind off the flat land seemed to pull back for just that moment. Eli said it again, quieter, more sure. Mama. Garrett had him by the shoulders before the echo died, pulled him back, crouched down, one hand spread across that small chest. Eli wasn't reaching any more. He was just looking. Across the street at this woman he had never once seen before in his life. The woman was looking back at him, and her face, that still, composed, unrevealing face, moved. Not into softness exactly, into something that had been living underneath the stillness, something with a name neither of them would say. It closed again almost immediately, but Garrett had seen it, and his legs were already moving. He did not make a speech. He walked across that street with Eli against his chest, and June's hand found his. And he stopped in front of the marshal and looked at him the way a man looks at arithmetic he has already done. What's the claim worth? Not a question. The marshal blinked, named a figure. Inflated. Room to negotiate. Garrett came back lower. Firm. One more exchange, and it was finished. He reached into his coat. The winter flour money, the lamp oil money. 2 months of careful saving counted into the marshal's hand without Garrett looking at his own fingers. The marshal pocketed it and stepped back. Garrett picked up the bag thrown into the dirt, turned to the woman. She was watching him, not with gratitude. It wasn't gratitude. It was assessment. the careful, unhurried kind, like she was deciding something and intended to decide it correctly. He held the bag out. She took it. Their hands did not touch. He looked at her, really looked, and found he had no clean category for what he saw. Old enough that the years were in her face honestly, without apology. She stood there in the dirt with the Marshal's boot print still on her sleeve, and looked back at him with the dignity of someone who had never once needed a room's approval to know her own worth. He had not seen anything quite like it. "You hungry?" She studied him. The wind moved between them. Then she adjusted the strap of her bag and walked toward him. He turned and led her home. The whole town watched, and he did not look back once. She did not speak much the first few days, neither did he. The house had its own language. The creak of the third board in the hallway, the kitchen door that had to be lifted slightly to close, the sound the wind made coming under the east eave at night. Nora learned it the way a careful person learns a new place, quietly, by attention. Garrett slept in the barn the first 2 nights. He did not explain this. She did not ask. The house still belonged to Ada. In some way he hadn't found words for yet, and she seemed to understand that without being told. On the 3rd morning he came in and found a small jar on the kitchen table. Eli was already trailing her at his usual 4 feet, patient and devoted in the way of young children who have made up their minds. Garrett picked up the jar, a salve of some kind, something medicinal in the smell of it. He looked at June's hands where she stood at the stove. They were no longer cracked and raw the way they'd been for weeks. He hadn't noticed June's hands. He stood there with that fact sitting on him like a stone on a fence post. He was still standing there when Nora came through the back door with an armful of firewood she had split herself. She set it by the stove without comment. "You didn't have to do that," he said, meaning the wood, meaning the jar, meaning something he didn't have a clean border around yet. "I know," she said, and went back outside for another armful. He went to hold the door open for her. It was the first thing he had done for her since the street. She reorganized the pantry without asking. Things grouped by use, the nearly empty tins moved forward. He came in one afternoon, and it was simply different, and he said nothing because she was right, and they both knew it. It was a rat that started it. A big one, coming out of the feed pile fast, hitting the stable floor and spooking the mare before Garrett could read what was happening. The kick caught him square in the midsection and put him back against the wall and down onto one knee, the breath completely gone. Nora appeared in the doorway. She went to the horse first. No rushing, no sharp movements. Just her voice, low and continuous, one hand out at the mare's eye level. The animal's ears came forward. Hooves slowed. She had her tied off inside a minute, smooth and certain, the way someone moves when the body does a thing without consulting anyone. Then she came to Garrett, still on one knee, jaw set, one hand flat on the stable floor. She crouched down and put a hand against his ribs, not pressing, reading. "Slow," she said. "Don't chase it." The breath came back in pieces. She kept her hand where it was until his chest expanded fully. Then she stood, held out her hand, walked him to the kitchen, sat him down, set water in front of him, and went back to what she'd been doing before. He sat there, breathing carefully, and watched her move through that kitchen. The horse calmed before he was, her hand on his ribs, reading him the way she read everything. Not gentle, just accurate. She was older than him, considerably. What he found, sitting in that chair with his midsection aching, was a steadiness in her that Ada had been growing toward when she died. Nora had simply had more years to arrive at it. He did not think less of those years. He thought considerably more of them. He was starting to understand what the boy had seen. The fever came on a Wednesday, 12 days after she arrived. Garrett almost missed it. Eli had been quieter than usual at supper, but the boy had quiet days. He was banking the fire for the night when Nora came through the kitchen doorway. She didn't say anything. She looked at him and then toward the children's room, and something in that look moved him toward the door before he'd decided to move. Eli was warm, too warm, that particular dry heat that meant a fever had been climbing for hours. Nora was already at her bag. She moved through it the way she moved through everything, calm so complete it quieted the fear in Garrett's chest rather than feeding it. She told him what she was giving the boy and why and what to watch for. Her voice was even. She did not speculate past what she knew. He sat in the chair in the corner because there was nothing else for him to do, and she had made that plain without saying so. Around 2 in the morning, sleep found him in the chair, and he didn't argue with it. When he woke, the lamp had burned low, and Eli was breathing the easy breath of a child who had come through something without knowing it. Nora was on the floor beside the cot, back against the wall, eyes open. She had not slept. Fever broke about an hour ago. He got up and made coffee, brought her a cup without asking and set it on the floor beside her, and went back to his chair. He had handed Ada cups of coffee 10,000 times without thinking. This was different, and he knew it, and he sat back down before he could look too directly at why. She wrapped both hands around the cup. The lamplight was low and amber, and the house was quiet, and he thought about Eli on that street. A 4-year-old with no politics about it, no arithmetic, had simply looked across a dusty road at a woman standing still in everyone else's noise and decided she was the one who would catch him if he fell. 4 years old. And not wrong. The child 2 streets over died of the same fever 4 days later. Garrett heard about it from the man who delivered the commission timber, said it plain, the way men said hard things in Abilene, without decoration. That evening, he looked at Eli breathing easy in his bed for a long time before he blew the lamp out. Word about Nora traveled the way it always traveled. Not all at once, but steadily, the way water finds its way through packed earth. By the following Sunday it had reached the church steps. Garrett knew because June told him. She came home from fetching eggs at the neighbor's with a particular set to her jaw. He crouched down in front of her. What did she say? She said Nora wasn't right in the head. That's why she travels alone. Garrett was quiet a moment. What did you say back? Nothing, June said. I just came home. He looked at his 7-year-old daughter and felt something move through him that he had no name for. Good, he said, and meant it completely. He told Nora none of this, but that evening at supper, he put the better portion on her plate, and June watched from across the table and said nothing at all. It was a Tuesday when it happened directly. Nora had walked to the general store alone. Garrett at the forge, the children at the house, the list short enough. She was at the counter when Mrs. Pruitt came in with another woman. The store owner, a thin man named Caswell, suddenly found something to occupy himself at the far end of the counter and left her standing there. The 2 women moved to where she had been standing without acknowledging she was still in it. Nora stood quietly for a moment. Then she set her list on the counter, put her coins beside it in a neat stack, and spoke in a voice that was perfectly even. When you're ready. She did not move. She did not leave. She stood with her hands folded and waited with the patience of a woman who had decided, somewhere along the way, that she was done being driven. Caswell came back, filled the order, did not meet her eyes. She thanked him, took her supplies, and walked home. She told Garrett none of it. But June noticed she was quiet at supper, and afterward brought Nora her coffee the way Nora always brought Garrett his, set it beside her without a word, and went back to her seat. Nora looked at that cup for a long moment. Then she picked it up with both hands and drank. One evening June went to bed early and Eli was long asleep, and Garrett found himself at the hearth with no particular reason to move. Outside the wind pressed at the eaves, and the warmth of the room was the specific earned warmth that only exists when there is genuine cold outside objecting to it. Nora came through. She did not go to her room. She sat at the far end of the bench, the careful choice, the choice of a woman who did not presume. They did not speak. The fire made it feel like enough. At some point he put another log on and sat back down slightly closer than he'd been. The cold had moved him. She did not move away. They sat until the fire burned low. He lay awake longer than he should have that night. She was older than him by enough that other men would raise an eyebrow. He thought about those men for about as long as it took the last log to settle. Then he didn't think about them anymore. The confrontation came on a Friday morning. Garrett had brought Nora to the general store. She knew the supply list better, and the list was long. Mrs. Pruitt was there with two other women whose names Garrett knew the way you know the names of weather systems, useful to recognize, not worth spending time on. Mrs. Pruitt waited until the room had enough people to constitute an audience. Then she arranged her face into concern and spoke about the children, their welfare, about how a man deep in grief was not always best placed to judge what he brought into a house, about county arrangements, about how nobody was suggesting anything unkind. The store went quiet. Nora's hands were still on the counter. She did not look at Mrs. Pruitt. Her face was that face, the one that gave away nothing, and had long since made its peace with rooms full of people deciding things about her. Garrett set down what he was holding. He looked at Mrs. Pruitt for a long moment, not with heat, with something colder and more final than heat. Ada would have liked her. That was all. He picked up the order, held the door, and Nora walked through ahead of him. He let it fall shut and did not look back. Mrs. Pruitt had nothing to say to that. Nobody did. The walk home was quiet. June and Eli were ahead of them on the road, June holding Eli's hand with that maternal firmness she'd developed over a long summer. The path narrowed past the old fence line, and without either of them arranging it, they were walking close, shoulders near enough that the cold air between them was thin. Garrett did not create more space. Neither did she. 30 steps like that, maybe 40. Then Eli looked back, broke free of June, and grabbed Nora's hand without ceremony, pulling her forward toward home with the confidence of a child who has never doubted where he belongs. She went with him. Garrett watched them from 2 steps behind, this woman and his son, her hand around his small one, moving through the frost-pale morning like they had always done exactly this. The hard news came on a Thursday toward the end of November. A rider brought word that the man holding the note on Garrett's pasture land had sold the debt to someone in Abilene, someone with less patience and other intentions. The window was narrow, and the money wasn't there, and Garrett stood in the kitchen and did the arithmetic 3 times and came up short each time. He set the letter on the counter. He was not ready to have a face yet. He heard her come in from the other room. He didn't turn around. She crossed the room and put her arms around him from behind. Not carefully, not with the softness of someone asking permission. The way you hold someone when you are refusing to let them carry something alone. Her hands flat against his chest, solid and unhurried and certain. He went completely still. Then slowly one of his hands came up and covered hers, his rough, forge-scarred fingers settling over her knuckles. He could feel her breathe. After a moment she stepped back. He let his hand drop. She went to the stove. He folded the letter into his coat and went to find his boots. He stood at the fence line a long time after that, looking at the pasture. His land, Ada's land, worked since before June was born. He thought about Nora's hands on his chest, the particular quality of a person who knew when to cross a room without being asked. He thought about Eli on that street. He was catching up to a 4-year-old's certainty. He was nearly there. The forge came back to life on a Monday. He went out before light. By the time Nora had the stove going, the sound of it was crossing the yard, the rhythm of a man and a hammer and a fire that know each other. June heard it from the kitchen and stopped moving and listened. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. At mid-afternoon, Nora carried water out and set it on the post by the forge door. She didn't go in. He came up for air an hour later, found the water, drank, and looked toward the kitchen window. That evening a man came by with a commission. Wagon axle work. Real money. First in 8 months. He greeted Nora on the porch. A single nod, nothing performed, just one person acknowledging another. She returned it the same way. The man went inside. June was in the doorway. She looked at Nora. Nora looked back at her. This time June did smile, small and quick, there and gone, her mother's smile on her father's serious face. Nora turned back to what she was doing before the girl could see that it had landed. 3 days later, Garrett rode to Abilene. Gone before light, back before supper, nothing said when he came in except to wash his hands and sit down. After the children were in bed, he took the land note from his coat and set it on the table. It had a line drawn through it, paid and settled in ink. Nora looked at it, looked at him. He picked it up and put it in the stove, and they watched it burn, and that was enough. A night came when Eli had a mild cough. Nothing serious, just enough to keep a parent listening. Nora had a pot going on the stove since before supper. Salt pork and dried beans, and a heel of cornbread broken into it. The kind of thing that fills a house with a smell so particular and so old that it stops being about hunger and becomes about something else entirely. Garrett had eaten 2 bowls without comment, which was, for him, high praise. They were both up past midnight, Eli on the small cot near the fire. The pot was still warm. The house smelled of it still. That deep, specific smell of something made slowly by someone who knew how. Garrett noticed it the way you notice warmth when you have been cold long enough to forget what warmth felt like. They talked some. Low, practical things. The land note settled, the commission and what it covered, the winter supplies. For the first time they talked about things that assumed a future with a shape to it. Neither of them remarked on this. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, Nora went quiet, mid-sentence, and was simply asleep, back against the wall, hands in her lap, head tilted slightly. The lamp made her face soft in a way the daylight didn't always show. Garrett looked at her longer than he meant to. She was old enough to have lived a whole life before he was grown. Whatever she had done with those years had made her into someone who crossed a room and held a grieving man without asking if he needed it, because she already knew. He was grateful for every one of those years, for what they had made her, for the fact that she had survived all of them and arrived, somehow, in his kitchen. He got a blanket from the chest and set it over her carefully, sat back down across the room, fell asleep some time before the gray came into the sky. When June came out in the early light, she found them both asleep on opposite sides of the room, with Eli breathing easy between them. She stood in the doorway a moment. Then she went to start the stove. This 7-year-old girl starting the stove in a house that finally felt like it had enough people in it. The fire caught. Outside, the frost was on everything, and the sky was going pink at the edges, and somewhere down the road a neighbor's rooster was making his case to the morning. The first hard freeze came on a Saturday before light. Garrett was at the forge before the dark lifted. She had the stove going not long after, something on it already, the kitchen filling with warmth and the smell of a morning that knew it was feeding working people. June and Eli were still asleep. He came in from the cold, hands red, breath showing for a moment before the warmth took it. He went to the basin, worked the pump handle, began washing the forge work from his hands. She set the cup beside him without turning all the way around. The way she had taken to doing it. The way Ada had done it. June had told her once without meaning to tell her. He looked at the cup. He looked at his hands. He looked at her. She met it. Straight and steady, the way she met everything. Outside, the frozen ground held the first gray light. The stove ticked. In the pen, a horse moved against the cold. "I'm not a man who says things well." She waited. "But I say what I mean when I say it." He picked up the cup, set it back down. His jaw worked once, something being finished internally before being committed to words. He turned to face her fully. The first time in all these months he had turned to face her like that, square, open, nothing arranged about it. June needs a mother. Eli already thinks he has one. He held her eyes. "I'd like to make them right. Marry me, Nora." The fire breathed in the stove. The frozen world outside held its silence. Somewhere in the house a small boy turned in his sleep. Nora looked at him for a long time, long enough that the whole kitchen seemed to hold itself around that silence, around those words still hanging in the cold morning air. Then she reached out and took his hand, his blacksmith's hand, wide and scarred and honest, and turned it over and looked at it the way she looked at everything, fully, without hurry. She set it against her cheek and closed her eyes, just for a moment. Then she opened them, looked at him. "Yes," she said, simply, the way she said everything that mattered. He let out a breath, long and slow, the breath of a man setting down something he had carried so long he had forgotten it had a weight. He looked at her in the early light, really looked. The lines of her face, the gray in her hair, the quality of a person the years had weathered and not diminished by a single day. He was 28 years old, and he understood what that meant against her years. That she had lived more of her life than he had lived of his, that the winters ahead of her were fewer than the ones behind. He found that this made him want to be careful with the ones that remained. Not sorrowful, not resigned, careful. the way you are with something that has already proven itself worth keeping." He kept looking at her until that almost smile appeared, the one that lived at the corner of her mouth and never quite committed. And then he looked away, because some things a man can only take in pieces. From somewhere in the house, Eli called out. The warm, uncomplicated call of a child who has never once doubted he will be answered. Both of them moved toward the sound.